WCON 1170 Radio and Star Vision Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. It's always good to be on the air talking with you about significant issues facing not only your community but our state and what's happening in our state. Big issues oftentimes impact us, and we don't really get to talk in depth about it. And we're fortunate today on We Should Know to have Senator Brent Jackson with us. Senator Jackson, thank you for taking time to come in and talk to us today. It's been a while since you've been in. You've been so busy. It's been hard to get you into the studio to sit down with us for a while.
Right. Well, J.W., thank you, and I'm glad to be here today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Now, you are in, just so we kind of set the stage, you're into your second term as a North Carolina senator, correct?
That is correct.
And every 2 years, you go to your constituency and say, you want me to serve again? And so they've elected you the second time. How's things looking in Raleigh? I'm going to just kind of open that general discussion question. Raleigh, we've heard so much out of Raleigh. What's happening in Raleigh?
Well, J.W., not to offend you, but don't believe everything you see on TV or read in print. But we have done a lot of great things in Raleigh since I've been there for the 3 years basically going on. Mm-hmm. And we have tried to rein in some spending, and we've done that. And, of course, there was opposition to that. Everybody wants to cut, except when you go to cutting on them. They don't particularly like that. Mm-hmm. But we have done some things, and we came in, in 2011 when we first went into session with nearly a $3 billion deficit, and we balanced the budget without raising taxes on that. We've had $1.5 billion in overspending on Medicaid that sort of got out of control that we've had to adjust since 2012. We were able to do that this session as well without increasing tax. We done something that no other state in the nation can claim they have done. We actually have started what I consider a work in progress on overhauling our tax system here in North Carolina. There was a lot of states that tried it this year, and none of them, to my knowledge, was successful. Now, what we got was not probably the best for everybody, but it was a good start. And it's something that I had learned had been attempted at least 8 times in the last 30 years, and nothing had ever been done except for this time. So I think we had a great session. Everybody did not come out of there getting everything they wanted. But for the most part, I think when I talk about the folks that are actually paying the taxes, I think they'll see a big difference to them in the long term.
One of the things when we talk about taxes comes to mind immediately, and I think this was a resounding kind of impact coming out of Raleigh, was the whole issue of education. And of course, education takes up a huge chunk of that $20+ billion budget. When we look at that, and as you said a while ago, you're exactly right. I think you're better off to pay attention to maybe We Should Know, because we're going to give folks a little more in-depth coverage, hopefully. But when we look at that and we see the things happening on what was so-called the Moral Mondays and those kinds of things, I'm sure a lot of those folks were very conscientiously concerned about education. And as I told you a while ago before we went on the air, I've interviewed the superintendent of public instruction, Dr. Atkinson, and one of the things we talked about was the budget, and she agreed the legislature did give education more money, but it was division. Talk to us about that, and let's just kind of discuss that in general as to it relates. How much money can we afford to give education? Is there a stopping point?
Well, I agree. Education makes up over 56% of the state's budget, of that $20-some billion budget. 56% of that goes to education, and that was a $360+ million increase from the previous session, and that is the highest it's been since back in the heydays of 06-07, I think, is when we're back to that level. But the problem, which is not a problem, it's a challenge. The challenge that North Carolina is facing, we're having such a population influx that maybe when the population is calculated into this and the enrollment is calculated into it, it appears that they are getting less than they were getting previously. But as far as actual dollars, they are getting more dollars, but the enrollment has increased more rapidly than the pace of trying to increase educational spending.
Well, I think you used the correct word, at least in my opinion, and it is a challenge. I think it's a challenge not only for you as a legislator and a person that's devoted their time of public service, but it's a challenge for teachers in the classroom. It's a challenge on multiple levels. Let's talk about just for a minute that part of education that is so important to this area, not only Sampson County, but the 8 or 10 counties surrounding Sampson County, and that is the whole immigration population. Some teachers in some schools are showing up to 40 to 50%, even some close to 60%. Of folks that do not speak, should I say do not speak readily English, and it's a challenge for the teacher in the classroom. Any thoughts on how they deal with that?
Well, I don't know that I have any thoughts on that. I have my thoughts, but I don't know if they would be worth the paper, that you're writing on. That is a challenge that these teachers face daily. And I'd like to say this, J.W., we really have a passion in this state for education. We always have. This state has always been known as a progressive thinker when it comes to education, and we have not lost that goal. The General Assembly currently has not lost that goal. We're very compassionate with the things that are going on with the teachers. We understand, times are different now than they were when you and I were in school. We never had a deputy at the gate or at the door. And now most every school does. They've got a term for that. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but they're deputies to me.
School resource officer.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. But things are really, they have a challenge. I mean, and it takes someone that is dedicated and really has a passion to be a teacher this day and time. And we certainly do appreciate that, by all means.
When we look at education, how does the charter school and private school component help or not help, or benefit or not benefit when we look at that huge equation of money? Public schools, there's somewhere around 2,500 public schools in North Carolina. The ceiling has been kind of lifted for charter schools and private schools. Do you see that as a benefit to not necessarily challenge public schools, but to help level that playing field as folks send their children to private schools? And I'm sure you, as well as I, know a lot of folks that their children does go to private schools.
I do know a lot of folks that go to private school. I have mixed emotions about the charter school and the private school with funding. It's my opinion that I have no problem with them sending their student or their kid to a private school or charter school, and I have no problem with that money following that student. The problem I have is when that particular student, as we've seen in some cases, is not living up to the expectation of that new school, of that charter school or private school, putting them back in public school and the money not going back. And that's where the shortfall, in my opinion, comes on that. So I think, if they're going, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and they need to take the good with the bad and sort of average it out. And I think that's where we're sort of missing something. But on the positive side, a charter school or a private school sometimes in a community can offer courses that the public school cannot offer. And I think that is a benefit, as if the parents are willing to pay for that.
Part of the school environment as well, and I've talked to a couple of superintendents recently on this show, and part of that school environment is concerned about safety. The legislature allocated funds this year for safety and security reasons in schools, simply because what we have seen played out over the nation with various just unbelievable, horrific situations, Sandy Hook most recently. How do you feel about, have we allocated enough resources to that? Do you feel like, what do you feel about that as you kind of put your head on the pillow at night? Does sometimes it bother you? Because I know you have children, grandchildren, and everything else, and you're concerned about it as well as everybody else.
Well, I am concerned about it, and the tragedies we have seen, and they certainly are tragedies, and not to downplay that, but to answer your question, which was, have we put enough resources there? I really don't think we have, but I don't think we've had the extra resources to put there. But I also believe, too, we need to approach this with very much caution. We've got to be extremely particular of whom we put in that position that we strap a gun on or whatever that's in the school system. So there's a lot of cautiousness in my mind on how we approach this thing. And of course there was a lot of discussion about that in the General Assembly this past session, and that'll continue to be discussed as we move forward.
When you go about your district now, which has changed a little bit, we were talking about that a while ago. You've got parts of Cumberland County now.
Nope.
No Cumberland County. Tell us exactly where you're.
I still have all of Duplin County, all of Sampson County, and I have the majority of the geography in Johnston County.
Okay.
But I do not have the highest population area I have in Johnston County is the Cleveland Schools community, which is up near the Wake County line.
So you do have some addresses, I guess post office addresses that show in Wake County that show up like Garner in that area. Same thing probably with Fayetteville. You got some people that's
not that many. When you get down into the Altreville area, there is some, before you cross the river, that do have Fayetteville or Beaver Dam addresses.
When you're going around talking to your constituency in these areas, looking at the budget and the percentage of the budget that is in education, what are the kinds of things you hear from your constituency? Does it reflect the amount of money that's being spent? For example, is people talking to you more about education, or are they talking to you more about other things?
Well, me being a farmer, they mostly talk to me about ag issues.
Yeah.
But
we're going to get into that in a minute.
But I do get a lot of comments on education, and I get a lot of comments on other things as well. But the key, I guess, that I have derived from most of my meetings with the constituents, whether it be one-on-one or whether it be a group of folks, is that they think we are spending adequate amount of money as far as our budget goes. They didn't. Of course, nobody wants to see a tax increase. And they wanted us to sort of ring in some of the spending that is done by the state agencies, and we've done that for the most part.
Well, these are issues I think is significantly important to us as we look at what's going on in Raleigh and the contact you have in Raleigh and the input, because as you just said, you're a successful agribusiness man. You have been there, kind of done that, so people do lean on you based on your expertise. I've had Representative Bell in here, and of course his background is in education, and a lot of folks look at his exemplary record and they lean on him for that. Is there any coming together of the two parties, or do you see more and more polarization between the two political structures?
J.W., to answer that question, I see very little polarization when I'm in Raleigh. More of it is out on the streets, I guess so to say, or out when you get in the districts, you hear more of it. The legislation that I've sponsored and passed has had bipartisan support since the get-go. And I have worked well with my counterparts, and so I'm pleased with the support we've had.
We're going to come back in a minute and continue this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Senator Brent Jackson, and we're talking about issues facing Raleigh and you and how it impacts. We'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. We're coming to you on WCLN Radio, Star Vision Cable Channel 16, and also Star Vision TV Channel 16. There's a replay of this program Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 p.m. You can see us on the television there, and our guest and the discussion of what we're talking about. We encourage you to do that. We also encourage you to continue sending your comments, suggestions to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. We have with us today Senator Brent Jackson. Senator Jackson, I want to thank you for being here. The amount of time and dedication that you put into this, and all your associates up there are doing the same thing. When you started and decided you wanted to run for Senator, North Carolina Senate, did you realize it was going to be this encompassing as far as your time and the amount of effort it takes to because you're in Raleigh, a lot of folks don't realize, but you're on the road very, very early in the morning, and sometimes it's very, very late when you come in. So talk about just what it takes out of you to serve the people of this state.
Well, J.W., I'll tell you this. Some folks have asked me what is the major thing I've learned up there. I said, those folks that talked to me about running and said it wouldn't take much time, I said, they lied to me. Is what I tell them. Actually, it is basically a full-time job, if you want to know the truth about it. But I represent basically 190,500 people. And most all of them that I know of have opinions. A lot of them have serious issues they're dealing with in their day-to-day life, and we try and help as many of those as we can. Sometimes our hands are tied on what we have to deal with, and a lot of them are federal issues, and some of them are local issues, but normally on the local side we can do something to help them there as well. But it has been rewarding in that to know that you've helped someone, and there's been a lot of disappointments when you know you can't help someone and you know they really need help. And that's basically what, to me, the office is all about, is doing what I consider to be the will of the people, because there's lots of times I've voted when if it had been just me, as I used the term, if I was the dictator, I'd done it this different. But I know I've had constituent concerns and outcries that they wanted it done this way, and that's the way we done it.
We've seen, again, back to our original comments, we've seen sitting in this area east of 95, and some of our listeners are, believe it or not, are in Wake and Johnson County. But as we sit here in your area of constituency, sometimes we look and we see things happening on TV. What is the most troubling thing that, as you looked at passing laws and legislative actions, and you see the pushback on Moral Mondays and Reverend Barber and others, do you ever get a feeling that you would like to maybe help explain a little bit more, or what is folks missing that maybe you think they are when you look at those kinds of protests going on?
Well, Moral Mondays to me, and I'll probably get shot for this by my staff.
It's never bothered you before.
Actually, I really understand what they were doing. They were exercising their rights, that we're all guaranteed to voice their opinion, and they have the right to do so. I intentionally would, from where my office was, I could see the crowds gathered at the Halifax Mall there. And I would actually mingle through them as I went into session. And, sometimes I would stop and talk with them if they'd ask me a question. And I was not intimidated by them. I mean, they're normal people. They're North Carolinians, most of them. Now, there was some out of state, as we were told later on, but to me, they were voicing their opinion. What impact they had upon legislation, I think, was very little. I don't think it didn't change my mind in any case, and I don't think it did a lot of the other legislators, depending on, even regardless of the party affiliation. But what they were doing was exercising their right, and I think we all have that. We have that right to do that.
Is there a consensus of feeling within the Republican Party, since 1998, the first time Republicans has had control of the legislature and the executive branch? Is there a feeling that the folks have sent you to Raleigh to do certain things, and the Republican Party's kind of stood for that banner of kind of less government, more business involvement? Do you feel that message that you've received, you're still able to make that happen in some way?
I do, JW. I believe I was sent there, one, because we needed to change, and two, to control spending, as we talked about earlier, and also, to provide the necessary services that this state needs, not the abundance of services, but the necessary services. And there's a big difference between our wants and our needs. And we've just come out of a great recession, and we have very little resources to work with, and there's a lot of surprises we found along the way, like the $2.5 billion that the employers owe unemployment insurance, that is going to take a big toll on them. And so we've had to address those issues, and we've had to make needs, and we've done this sort of, in my opinion, in a way a business would operate. We've had to sort of tighten our belt, and I know that saying's been used a lot, but I mean, in business, when we realize that sales are off, we have to make some adjustments, and that's what we have done. And sometimes those adjustments are not met with they're done with the best of intentions, but they're not met with the happiest of people.
Absolutely. And as a statesman now, as a politician in Raleigh, as a senator, also you're grounded as a successful businessman, agribusinessman. What would you say to business folks that are listening to us? And we have a number of folks out there on tractors that listen to us, believe it or not. I have people stop me and say, yeah, I heard you the other day I was doing something in the field, and I'm always amazed at that. But what would you say to those people that they need to know that maybe some of the challenges that you're fighting for them for that they might have missed in mainstream media?
Well, there's a lot of things that they might have missed in the mainstream media, because the media, for the tendency, has sort of one-sided. And I really hate to say that, but that's sort of, I didn't believe that until I actually seen what was happening and seen what was being reported. Was really one-sided reporting is what it amounted to. But business folks should be content to know that we are doing everything we can to get them back on their feet, and so they can create jobs which will eventually turn this thing around, because that's what it's all about, is trying to create jobs. I was just recently, as of last week, named the third top senator in the state for being business friendly and working with businesses and trying to reduce regulations. And that was another thing that I was sent to Raleigh to do, was sort of get some of these burdensome regulations off of folks that are out here trying to make a living.
One of the things I found interesting, and again, it's been some time since we've had you seated, so I went back and looked at some of the bills and stuff that you were directly responsible for, actually taking leadership roles, and others that you were involved in. Well over 100 of those. Yep. Sometimes anybody can look this stuff up, it's there, but sometimes you look at it and you see folks that never introduce anything, never lead anything, but you've been pretty aggressive in the past, just a short term in 3 years, and getting a lot of legislation passed.
Well, you know, I've come from the produce side of the world, and the early bird gets the worm. I guess
it don't stay fresh long.
That's right. Yeah, it don't. Yeah, as Commissioner Graham used to say all the time, you either sell it or smell it. Right. And so I've taken that same attitude, to Raleigh, and I don't think I'll stay here forever in this position. So, but I want to be able to get done what I can that I think it will be a benefit to Eastern North Carolina.
One of the things you mentioned a while ago was taxes, and of course taxes is always on the mind of the individuals as well as, and even more so, I guess, than businesses. And you look at taxes, whether it's ad valorem taxes and county taxes, or you look at state taxes. What do you see as one of the successes, one of the most important successes you think you have accomplished as it relates to benefiting business with taxation in North Carolina?
I think the biggest thing we have done is encourage the business community to know that we are looking after some of their interests, and that we're trying to put a tax plan together that will be consistent and they can depend on from year to year. The businesses I have spoken to are not looking for a 0% tax on their income tax, but they are looking for something that is steady and is not changing like a yo-yo up and down all the time. And that's, I think, with what we've enacted, I think is the foundation of what we can build upon going into the next session, that we can just continue to build upon what we laid this year as the foundation to make it more for not only businesses but even the individual taxpayer. I mean, they're getting a lower rate this year, or will starting in 2015, than they've seen ever before, well, in recent memory. Let me rephrase that. But, it's something they can count on. It's a constant they can count on, that we will be building upon it.
One of the largest taxes, and if I don't mention this, trust me, I will get calls and emails and letters, but one of the biggest taxes is, of course, on petroleum and gas, fuel, when you go to the pump. And we're one of the largest taxed, I guess, in the southeastern region as far as states is concerned. And a lot of that money, of course, I think all of it's supposed to go, if I'm correct, toward roads and building roads. Do you see any potential of decreasing that tax to help folks that has petroleum issues, or maybe they're like you are, a farmer, and you got hundreds of thousands of dollars you pay every year in petroleum? Do you see any movement on that at all, or is that something that needs to stay where it is?
Well, we have froze the gas tax, or extended the freeze we had in place. The issue we've got, though, is we have got major infrastructure needs in this state. One, because of the population. Two, because of the aging of our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges. And I think we've got our bridges pretty much on track and with the funding to get them up to speed where they need to be. And the next project is, as you're aware of, I'm sure, the new governor's plan for transportation, which we sort of spearheaded in the Senate as well, and, along with the House to join that. I think you'll see more locals having more input. I think this will be the best way to go from here forward, and it won't all be going to the metropolitan areas. Rural areas and regional areas will have a more stronger stance in getting some of the things they need done.
Transportation, when you look at that, I always have to reflect back on a conversation I had with some folks for the North Carolina port down in Wilmington some time ago. That's an important part of that as well, as shipping and shipments of goods and products.
Well, that's an excellent example there, because, we have no rail to the Wilmington port.
That's right.
And that's something that's been looked at, and there was actually even a bill introduced, but it was not able to get enough ground to get it done because we didn't have the money, because we're looking at $65 million, I believe, to get from Wallace to Wilmington. But we've got to get that done before we can actually start utilizing our ports to their full potential.
Well, we're going to take another break, and we'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Senator Brent Jackson. We've got to take a break and hear from our many sponsors that keep us on the air and keeping us moving forward. So stay with us, call a friend. We're talking with Senator Brent Jackson. We'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. We'll come to you on WCLN Radio, Star Vision TV, Star Vision Cable Channel 16. Tuesdays, 2:30 to 3:30, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 7 p.m. I want to thank all those folks at the radio station that mentions our show, Robert Stroud with the Boogie Shoes Radio show, Don Smith with the Country Store, the gang of three there in the morning that talks about us periodically on that show, Tommy the Fly, we thank him. Nicole, we want to thank you for your introduction each and every week. Senator Brent Jackson, you're with us today, taking some time to be here. We've talked about a number of things, and I want to kind of get into something that is, I'm going to try to tie both of these together. It's very important to you, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, and it's regulations and agriculture. If anybody knows anything about agriculture and regulations and some of the pushback that a lot of folks that are in agribusiness need, and you've talked about it on this show before, is some relief in the regulatory side of the house. What do you feel like you've accomplished in that since you've been in? And I won't go over all the huge number of committees that you chair and co-chair because it's just too exhausting. I would spend the entire show reading those names of those committees. But what do you think some of the key accomplishments you've made for farmers and agricultural people?
Well, we've done a lot of good things for agriculture, especially this year. I think the biggest compliment I've been paid this year is I had a gentleman that's been up there working the General Assembly for 30-some years as either an attorney or a lobbyist. And he made the comment, he said, you know, you've done more for agriculture than I've seen done in the last 25 years. And some of those things are, we've suspended the truck weight in severe weather. So, you know, these farmers we've got to get our crops out. If we know a hurricane's coming, we can't wait till they issue a warning out of Raleigh for us to start doing what we need to do. We have to be prepared, you know, 5 days, sometimes 10 days out. I mean, and start hauling those. So we've worked on issues like that with DOT or the division DMV, excuse me, not DOT, DMV, stopping these trucks, you know, and so we've sort of got it where the Commissioner of Agriculture can call the governor and they can talk about this, because before they couldn't even do that, but now we've got it in statute where they do have to do that, and they can, and the governor can issue an executive order and get these growers some help. The other thing we have done with Senate Bill 379 is, you know, we're talking about all this energy that's trying to go on in the state. Well, unless we put some money towards rural North Carolina, rarely will many of us see natural gas. Or will we see propane accessible to us, you know, other than having to go through our local dealers. So we set aside $5 million a year in a program and it was no new money. We just allocated, because I got to looking, JW, at all the programs that any new business or existing business that was non-agriculture could go and get, but agriculture didn't have nothing. They had absolutely zero incentives they could go get to help them out with infrastructure needs. And so we have set aside $5 million of the millions we give to economic development just for agricultural purposes, whether it be for expanding the natural gas line to their bulk tobacco barns, or whether if it's in an area where natural gas will never be, they can still get assistance with propane. And so we've tried to balance that. The other thing that we done that was so large this year was what we called the North Carolina Farm Act of 2013. And it is a coalition of many things. It gives some growers that are Global Gap and Good Agricultural Practices certified some level playing field should they be sued, that, you know, that it gives them a step up, because they've gone through all the requirements to get those certifications. And so that was one thing we done. Sprinkler systems in migrant housing, we've reworked that to some degree, so that, you know, if they're built a certain way on a concrete slab, concrete walls, metal roof, they don't have to have sprinkler systems like you would see in the Holiday Inn. And, you know, there's many other things we've done. We've given the Department of Agriculture and the Board of Agriculture the authority to regulate what is actually grown in this state. He or that department has never had that authority. They just assumed they had it, and so did everybody else. But actually now we've codified that in law, that the Department of Agriculture and the Board of Agriculture has the final say in what someone can or cannot grow in this state. And before, county and city were placing ordinances saying what they could and could not do. And so we've sort of tried to curve that down some. We've done a lot of things with the weights on these livestock feed trucks. We've allowed them to go up to 90,000 pounds, which most of them are going to 84, 85,000, because that way, just in one of the integrators will save 40 trips a week by allowing them to add 2 extra tons, which is 4,000 pounds. And that 40 trips is not only a savings to them, but can be passed all the way down to the grocery store and to the consumer when they buy that product. And plus, it's environmental friendly. I mean, the footprint, you know, is a much less of a footprint we're doing there. So we've done a lot of things that will not necessarily jump out at anybody, but it's things that most folks in agribusiness, whether it be livestock or whether it be produce or corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, peanuts, sweet potatoes, these are things, and even the organic growers as well, these are things that will make their lives a little bit less burdensome as they move forward trying to make a living off the land.
Something I got to mention and just got to get an observation on, and it's agriculture related. And again, it's one of these things. If I don't mention, somebody will say, well, "Why didn't you mention that?" $7.3 billion, Smithfield Foods. What is your thoughts on that? I know there's still some talking going on. There's still some concern. This is a Chinese corporation, I understand. And I won't get into the details because, quite frankly, I don't know all the details, but when folks heard that, there was a sense of pushback. I've also talked to people in the business that say it's a good thing because it helps with some of those very things you talked about, regulation. So what's your thoughts on that, and what do you know that maybe you could tell us?
Well, from the information I've been given, and they've tried to keep me up to date on this, and actually, matter of fact, I had a breakfast with the chairman of the board of the new company, and I'm sure I'm going to murder the name of it, but it's Shunwei, I believe. Very nice gentleman. Of course, we had to have a translator between us, but we had a great conversation last Monday, and you know, had a breakfast and enjoyed hearing how they do things in China, and he enjoyed hearing about what all we grow here in North Carolina. Right. I think it will be good for our exports. I think you'll see an increase in exports in the pork industry, and that's something we all need because China consumes the majority of the pork that's grown in the world today. And so I think it's only great that we can have this direct line to a new customers in the country of China.
The relationship between that purchase and jobs and job-related activities here in the eastern part of the state, give us some thoughts on that. Is that going to be that $7.3 billion purchase? Is it going to take away jobs? Is it going to add automation where jobs will be gone? The investment factor, where are we at on that?
Well, I think you'll see jobs added because I think we'll be able to produce more pork, and anytime you increase the size of the herds or increase more farms, you know, you've got to have more people to work those jobs. So I can see it being a job plus.
A lot of discussion, and I think there's probably not a week goes by you don't see something about livestock in the paper, about regulatory issues, about attorneys suing somebody, about environmental issues. Are we going to reach the point anytime in the future that the environmental issue will open up to where folks will build more livestock facilities, or are we pretty much where we are in concentration in North Carolina now?
Well, I don't know. To answer your question, it's sort of a multiple answer.
Okay.
We have done some things in the last 2 years that will allow a person to build a larger footprint and house more livestock on the same basic footprint that they have. I work closely with Secretary John Scavara on Diener and DWQ. You know, if you've been reading, there's been a merger between the divisions of water, clean water, and waste management, wastewater. And so those are some efficiencies they're doing in that office. We still have a few hiccups that we're trying to work out, but we're trying to get it more of a common sense balancing act so that we all have environmental concerns and they are being addressed. But there's a point to where sometimes they're being overly addressed, and we're working on those areas.
Well, Senator, and I've got it's another one of these questions I don't ask. Trust me, I know I'll get questioned why I didn't ask, because you mentioned infrastructure a while ago, and we talked about roads, we talked about transportation. Right. Part of the infrastructure for agriculture, as you well know, because I know you're involved in utilizing that infrastructure, and that's technology and communication. Yeah. One of the things that is going on now is this fiber to homes and fiber to businesses. And fiber is very important to business because it basically opens up a huge front of communication and technology. In essence, you can send more stuff down the pipe. Right. Is there, in that infrastructure discussion, is there anything about support for infrastructure for places like Star Telephone and others to get that infrastructure to agricultural locations?
Well, there is the broadband initiative that has been in place for several years, and we've sort of strengthened it in we're just trying to get internet to everyone in this district, if you want to know the truth about it. A lot of rural North Carolina still does not have internet access, especially DSL. They don't have that, much less fiber. Now, I know Star has been very active in trying to get fiber buried throughout their regions, and it has made a tremendous difference. But there is some funds in the broadband, because just in the Bentonville area in Johnston County, we've just finished a project up there where they were able to get internet where they had not had it before.
And I think the fiber becomes a critical part of infrastructure simply because of the volume of things you can send, and a businessman like yourself obviously understands that. I mean, if you had to compress a lot of stuff and try to send it on copper, you could do it much faster and with greater speed with fiber.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the wave of the future currently until something better is developed.
And as you talk to South River and various other cooperatives, that's one of the things they were kind of founded on is helping that rural community. They
were. And all that is federally regulated and federally funded, but the state has very little input into that. But, you know, that is what it was about. It was about getting services to folks that had never had it before.
Well, we're going to take another break. I want to take a minute as we go to our next break. I want to thank everybody for looking at the show. And also I want to kind of give a shout out to some folks out there. Chris Naylor, who's a young farmer. We've got a lot of young, aggressive agricultural people here in this part of the state, and I want to just kind of mention that these people actually keep everything going and keep food on our table. So we'll be back in a moment, and we'll continue discussion with Senator Brent Jackson. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. I just had a break with many of our sponsors for this show. We ask you, if you will, list some of those sponsors. If you can support them, we would appreciate that. They help us keep things moving, keep us on the air. We're talking with Senator Brent Jackson today. And Senator Jackson, we've got so much stuff going on in government. And I guess sometimes, as we talked about a while ago, you can sit there in your office in Raleigh and look out and you're going like, what's next or what's coming forward. But the folks in Raleigh have been pretty aggressive on a lot of issues. One of those things that we hadn't talked about is E-Verify. Let's talk about what E-Verify is and why it's important to not only business people but everybody.
Well, E-Verify, when it was enacted in 2011, well, first of all, let me say this. To me, E-Verify and the immigration issue is a federal issue, number one. Our delegation in Washington needs to get together and solve this issue for the whole world, or we'll be having borders from North Carolina to South Carolina or North Carolina to Virginia and vice versa. And I don't think any of us want to see that. So this is a federal issue. There was a big push, though, in 2011 to do something with E-Verify in North Carolina. And we were able to enact what I thought was a livable, at the time, means of doing that. But we found out it created a tremendous amount of burdensome paperwork, especially for those that were using legal workers, legal foreign workers. Every year you had to E-Verify the employee that maybe has been coming to, for instance, our farm for 20 years. And so what we done is we changed it. The bill originally started out as and the bill is still named Reclaim North Carolina. But the bill started out as a law enforcement bill, which the law enforcement folks wanted some way to know when that officer walked up to that car that illegal immigrant or that legal immigrant could present a permit, and they would know that they had gone through background checks, they had been checked out thoroughly, they had full insurance coverage, and they had been trained to drive in our state. And so that's sort of how it all came. Well, through the negotiations of how a lot of things work in Raleigh, it was dropped down to just a study except for the E-Verify part. And we changed the E-Verify to 9 months to more or less mirror the federal H-2A program. So if you work a worker that is here with a passport and a visa, well, first of all, let me back up and say, nothing in this bill makes it legal for you to hire an illegal. Right. that is still illegal to do so. And all this bill did was do away with the burdensome paperwork of H2A growers having to e-verify these workers every year, even though some of them have been coming back for 20 plus years.
Important for both agriculture, for landscapers, for a huge number of businesses that employ folks. There's a couple of big issues I know that was vetoed by the governor. You want to touch on any one of those? And of course, I think they call it a supermajority when the legislature comes back to town and says, look, we're going to push it back through anyway.
Right. Well, you know, let me say this first. We passed many bills that became law that the governor signed, hundreds of them, and we only had a hiccup on 2.
But those are the ones that the camera hits.
That's right. Those are the ones the camera hits. And one was the E-Verify Reclaim North Carolina. With all due respect to our governor, I believe that he just didn't understand the situation was as dear to eastern North Carolina and rural North Carolina as a whole when it comes to agriculture. And so it took us basically 7 minutes to override both of those bills in the North Carolina Senate. So there was a strong support for those bills when they passed. They were good policy when they passed. They had been well vetted. Matter of fact, the study that I mentioned just earlier was at the request of the governor to take all that other stuff out and put it as a study. So we sort of changed it to appease him, and still at the end he vetoed it. And you know, there again, with all due respect to our governor, I feel like maybe he was misled in his thinking on that particular bill. And on the drug bill, and all that bill did, if you're the social worker and you suspect that I, as an applicant, has a drug problem or a substance abuse problem, that you can request that a drug screening be done. And so we felt like that was a good bill. And so we felt like it sent a good message to everyone, because we wanted to make sure all the children of those their dependents will be taken care of. There's nothing changed there. I mean, there was no hard ill will done in either of these bills, and we felt like they were both good policy.
Well, and there's so much going on. It's like when we first started talking, I know I'm not going to cover everything I want to cover today, but I got to hit on this issue because it's one that has been on. It's one of those things, again, the camera's on, so we probably need to touch on it, and that's voter ID. I mean, apparently, United States Attorney Eric Holder has decided to take legal action and engage North Carolina in the voter ID law. Now, to clarify that for us, there are a number of states have similar voter ID laws. What's the specific issue in your mind related to North Carolina and why the federal government challenges North Carolina and not some of the other states?
Well, JW, I can't discuss much of that bill because of that lawsuit that is forthcoming. I still go back to what I originally have said. I think everyone should be able to present an ID when they vote so we'll know who's voting. And that's all, to me, this bill done. It done a lot of other things as well. Some of them were, I thought, okay. Some of them were just a little gray, in my opinion, as far as doing the right thing by some folks. But overall, it was a good bill. And I better hush at that, or me and you both will be in court.
Well, and certainly, I certainly don't want the federal light shining on me. I can tell you, and I know you don't either. As we look at that, folks just need to understand that, again, as you said on some previous vetoes that you guys have done, it was in the well-intended purpose of the best benefit of the citizens of North Carolina. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is, absolutely. And we feel like this was a good bill. There again, we feel like this was good policy, and we think when all said and done that this law will be upheld.
One of the big things that got a lot of media buzz, and still does, I guess it depends on what happens, is the whole issue of gun control in North Carolina. Legislature took some fairly aggressive moves and opened up the door for a person to possess a firearm in various locations and places in North Carolina. Tell us about that law, what was kind of looked at as that came to the Senate floor for a vote, and what kind of feedback did you get from your constituencies on that?
Well, the feedback I got from the constituency is that I would say 95% of them, and maybe even more, liked what we had done or what was being discussed. I would say probably 60% of the constituency that I heard from wish we had gone farther, to be honest with you. I had some reservations on some of the things, you know, that originally was being discussed. I mean, and so I think we ended up with a good compromise on trying to put the anti-gun and the pro-gun folks together and trying to make it safer for all North Carolinians.
I think a couple of areas that there seemed to be a lot of discussion about. One was firearms on college campuses and school campuses. But do you think that there was enough publicity out there to say that, and again I'm interpreting what I know about the law, is that those weapons would have to be secured in the trunk of a vehicle? It's not like you were saying somebody can strap a gun on and walk around in a classroom.
Well, I agree, and that was some of the concerns we had. I mean, another concern is having a concealed carry in an establishment that serves alcohol.
Absolutely.
I've still got a little problem with that
Yeah.
one. But, you know, what we ended up with, I thought, was a fairly compromised bill that will accomplish some of the things, but not all of the things that the pro-gun folks were wanting.
When you looked at doing that, and I'm sure there's people probably just don't realize how much paperwork you have to look at all the time, but when you looked at that, did you see other states with other cases that mirrored what North Carolina was doing, or were we setting some kind of precedent?
These were, what we done sort of followed some of the other states, and I was not on that. There was actually a subcommittee that handled all the gun issues, and I was not on that committee due to other committees I was on, but they looked at all the other states, and what we did, we didn't really do any groundbreaking stuff, but we did sort of solidify our Second Amendment rights here in North Carolina.
Okay. The other point or discussion, I want to just hit you with a question about the Department of Health and Human Services. As you know, and everybody does, again, all over the media, a lot of concern there, and Secretary Voss is a very exemplary person, probably one excellent choice I think most folks would agree the governor made. But she has an unbelievable job there, because we're talking about mental health, we're talking about substance abuse, we're talking about a number of issues from social services impacts all over the state. Where are we headed with that, and what are some of the problem areas that folks need to understand?
Well, the mental health and the Department of Health and Human Services has got, as I would call, a mess. And it's not something that has gotten there overnight. It has been a continual breakdown, in my opinion, for the last 10 or 15 years. I think it started when we lost our local health departments, per se, you know, and then it's just sort of progressively gotten worse. And we've got a Medicaid thing that's being mandated from federal down to us that has got out of control. And then they're working hard and diligently to get that under control. To make matters even worse, they implemented a new software program called NC Tracks, and that has not went off as fast as they thought it had. And there's been a lot of major hiccups. We've heard from a lot of our constituencies that are not getting paid. Matter of fact, I heard from some last week that hadn't been paid in 6 months. I've heard of some that's not being paid as long as 9 months. So there is a lot of things that's got to be done, but they are working on it. But it's one of those things where sometimes I wonder, just Brent's personal opinion is, if we wouldn't be better off to just shut the whole system down and start from the ground back up. Because it is really a mess. And
there's a lot of critical issues there. A lot of critical needs there that has to be addressed.
They have to be addressed. And, you know, sadly, it's hard for folks to really get the help they need with the current system we have, because it has got so big and cumbersome, it sort of took on a life of its own.
Well, again, I want to thank you for coming. I want to give you a few seconds, kind of wrap up anything you want to say to your constituency that might be listening.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, JW. And the only thing I would say is, when you're looking at the things we've done in Raleigh, or the things I have done in Raleigh, I'd like for you to keep one thing in mind, and that being that when I vote on a budget, I don't have the option of picking and choosing. I sort of have to do the best I can with what I got, and that's what we've been doing.
And we encourage folks to call you if they have questions or comments. And going forward, I don't know that the waters are going to get any smoother. They might get a little more turbulent.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today. Again, we've been talking with Senator Brent Jackson, and it's been an opportunity that we look forward to having any of our political officials come in to talk to us. So stay with us, and we'll see you again next week on the radio.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question or comment regarding this or any episode, please send your email questions and or comments to jwsimmonsedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday afternoon beginning at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.